Hello, it's April from April's Home, and today I thought I would share with you a fun recipe for dinner. This recipe is for my porcupine meatballs, and it is a wonderful recipe to stretch hamburger. This was something I grew up eating, and it is a wonderful recipe. So here's what you'll need. You'll need some ground beef, some hamburger. This one happens to be 80-20. It was what was in the store. I would probably normally get a slightly leaner cut for this recipe, and for every pound of hamburger, you will need half a cup of rice. This is 2.81 pounds, so nearly 3. So I'll probably use about a cup and a quarter of rice, maybe close to a cup and a half of rice. And then you'll need some crushed tomatoes. I enjoy the kind that are already seasoned a little bit with oregano and basil, but you can just use regular crushed tomatoes too if that's what you have. And I also like to add in a can, a smaller can. This is 14.5 ounces of the diced fire roasted tomatoes. These crushed tomatoes are in a 28-ounce can, so a little bit bigger jar there. You'll need 2 eggs. You'll need some chopped onion, the dehydrated onion, and some Italian seasonings, and you'll need a bowl to mix that all in. You'll also need a baking dish. I've pre-sprayed this with a little cooking spray, and you'll want to preheat your oven to 375. So first I'm going to start by putting my hamburger into my mixing bowl, along with 2 eggs, and like I said, half a cup of rice per pound of hamburger, and it's usually about 1 egg per pound of hamburger. I'm only using 2 eggs today because it's not quite 3 pounds, but yeah, you'd want to use about 1 egg per pound. If you're making a slightly smaller batch, my mom, when it was just me and my sisters, my mother would just use 1 pound, and the rice stretched it enough to make a whole meal for all of us. So, but today I'm going to make up some extras. My husband loves having leftovers in the fridge, so I'm going to go ahead and cook up this whole pack of hamburger in this format. So I'm going to go ahead and put the hamburger in the bowl, the 2 eggs, and about a cup and a half of rice. Then I'll come back and show you how I season that up. Okay, so I have my hamburger and rice and the 2 eggs all in the bowl. And now I'm going to go ahead and add some of my chopped onions. Because this is a larger recipe, I'm going to go ahead and add 2 tablespoons. There's 1. Here's another. So we've got that there. Again, about a tablespoon per pound, pound and a half of hamburger. And then you'll need some Italian seasoning. I don't really measure the Italian seasoning. I just kind of add in a little bit there, just what looks about right. That's probably only, it looks like a lot there, but it's probably only a teaspoon or something like that. Just however much you like the Italian seasoning. So now I'm going to go ahead. I've got a fork here. You could use a fork or a bigger mixing spoon or something like that to go ahead and thoroughly mix these up. I'll probably get these eggs here mixed up and blend this all together. And once all the ingredients are thoroughly combined, we'll be making these into meatballs. So I'm going to go ahead now and set down the camera and get this all mixed together. Okay, so I've gotten the meat mixture all combined together. I went ahead and used this big flat spatula to really break apart the meat and get the eggs beat up and the rice all mixed in. And at the end, I used my nice clean hands to go ahead and just mix this all the way through with my hands, just to make sure it was thoroughly combined. You really want to make sure you have an even distribution of the rice all the way through this hamburger. As you can see, the rice really adds a lot to this hamburger here. It's a very large amount here. And what we're going to do next is make the meatballs here. And these are fairly good sized meatballs. They are not really small ones. You want them to be a nice big size. That way you have a nice, this is the main dish, is this, because it has the starch in it. I usually just serve this with the sauce that it cooks in and a side of veggies and perhaps some Italian bread or French bread or something like that. So this is about the size you want, probably a little more than maybe 1.5 inches across. It's hard to describe the size, but just a nice good sized meatball there. And you will go ahead and before we put it in the pan here, I'll move my little spatula to the side. I'm going to go ahead and put the tomato sauce in the bottom of my pan here. Just the crushed tomatoes first. So I'll put that whole pan in. Make sure it's spread out across the bottom of the entire pan. And I'll put the roasted tomatoes on at the end. So we'll go ahead and start with our first one right here. I'll probably do 3 across and then fill it up like that. So I'm going to go ahead and make another one here. So just grab a pile of meat and just turn it into a meatball. Just like so. I like to make sure that they're, you know, fairly well packed so that it really holds together and doesn't break apart while it's cooking. So we'll go ahead and add that to the pile there, or to the pan. And you want them all to be a fairly uniform size so they cook at the same time. Okay, so there's our first 3, and I'm just going to go ahead and work through the rest of this and fill up my pan with all of the meatballs. If you get one that's a little too big, again, you want to keep it a fairly uniform size, so just break off a piece. And if you find one that's a little too small, you can reach in and add a little bit more until you get a uniform sized meatball. And these are called porcupine meatballs because when the rice, which is uncooked, the rice that you put in is just dry rice, it cooks within the meatball. It absorbs the moisture from the tomatoes and the moisture from the hamburger here, and the rice cooks. And as it cooks, it kind of pokes out around the meatball, so it looks like a prickly porcupine. So that is why they are called porcupine meatballs. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and keep going with this, and I'll be back to show you the next step. Okay, so I've got all of my meatballs in my pan and they just barely fit. I should have probably used a slightly larger pan for this much beef. Normally I make this with around 2 pounds of hamburger, not 2.8 pounds. So this was a tight squeeze, but you get the idea here, and I will leave the ingredients for this recipe in the description box below. So what you'll want to do now is take your fire roasted tomatoes and pour it over the top. I like the fire roasted tomatoes. They add a nice flavor to this recipe. You don't necessarily need to go over the top. In fact, I'll probably get my little spatula and kind of clear off the top here because we are going to be covering this with foil. And now I'm going to go ahead and add a can worth of water here too, just to bring the level of liquid up a little bit higher to the size of these meatballs. So what I do is I start with the can of water. Sometimes you need a little bit less. I'll kind of knock that off there. You don't want to cover the meatballs, but I do like to bring the level of liquid up, just so it helps cook the rice there. So I didn't quite use the whole can of water here. You just kind of eye it, maybe a little bit more there. So there it is. I'm going to go ahead and cover this with foil and put this in a 375-degree oven for about an hour and a half, and you'll know that they're done when they expand. You can see the rice is poking through and looks cooked. And I do like to take an internal temperature with my meat thermometer just to be sure. You can also cut one open and see if it's cooked all the way through. Just like to be extra careful cooking my hamburger all the way through. So that's what we'll do. We'll go ahead and cover this with foil and get this in a 375-degree oven for an hour and a half. I'll come back when these are all cooked and show you what they look like. And just a quick note about the foil covering the pan. I do like to go along the edges and make sure that there aren't any steam gaps here. That way it's really nice and sealed with this foil so it cooks through and gets that rice all the way cooked. So that's how I covered it with foil. And now we'll go ahead and get this in the oven. Okay, so the porcupine meatballs are all out of the oven and fully cooked. You can see how the rice has come out of the meatballs here to look like little porcupine quills. So there we have porcupine meatballs. We are steaming up some broccoli in the back there, and I've got some nice French bread to slice up, and I'll serve up a plate of these and show you what they look like all served up. You can see the delicious tomato sauce here has cooked in with the meat, so it's really flavorful. I like to scoop out a couple of the porcupine meatballs and then spoon on some of the tomato sauce on top of them and around them to kind of make a yummy little dish there along with our broccoli. So I'm going to go ahead and serve that up and show you what it looks like. So here is our porcupine meatballs all served up for dinner. You can see that I've put the meatballs here, the porcupine meatballs, in the sauce. I've served that with a little bit of buttered French bread and some steamed broccoli. This is also really good with a little sprinkle of Parmesan if you like that. This would also be good with a nice side salad as well. So that is porcupine meatballs, a very easy recipe, a nice dinner for the whole family. I hope you enjoyed taking a look at this recipe for my porcupine meatballs. Again, I will leave the ingredients and instructions in the description box below. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up, hit subscribe for more videos from April's Home. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you later. Goodbye.